it's all been negative, hasn't it? It's been about you've got mental health issues, and if you've got mental health issues, there's something wrong with you.
So welcome to another episode of the Everymind Podcast. I'm excited for this one, joined by Zoe Sinclair. So before we kind of dive in, Zoe, can you just let us know a little bit about what you do currently?
So currently I'm involved in two major projects, two businesses, Employees Matter and the Workplace Mental Health Conference, This Can Happen. So my journey started about 17 years ago now, when up until that point I had a career at the BBC, making television programmes, travelling around the world, really great. And then in quite a sort of stereotypical way, became a working mum, had two children, and I found it quite difficult. And I found it hard to... I went down to 3 days a week, but couldn't really fulfil my career expectations at a desk 3 days a week. Before I'd been travelling around the world making the programmes, and it just wasn't quite working for me. And I felt that the time had come to look at new challenges, and the whole thing about being a working parent and the challenge that it can be for a working parent really was very important to me and resonated with me. And so I went on to set up a company called Parents Matter, which was all about supporting working parents, going into companies, working with their HR departments, and creating opportunities for working parents to get support by sending in different speakers to support working parents. And this was at a time, as I said, quite a long time ago, where there were no childcare vouchers available. There wasn't 52 weeks maternity and paternity and shared parental leave like there is now. It was, a lot has happened in that time. So at that time, the doors really opened to me, and companies really were looking at their working parent policies and looking at flexible working, which was only really just starting then. So forward sort of 5-7 years, Parents Matter was really, it was becoming successful, working with lots of banks, law firms, management consultancies, arranging all sorts of seminars for working parents. And as time went on, the HR director clients of mine was saying, Zoe, this is really great, but we have to acknowledge that not all our working population are parents. And, we want to organise a wellbeing week. Is there anything that you could organise for us with the speakers then? Or we're looking to set up a gender network, not just a family network. What could you help us with? And I soon realised that if I wanted the company to expand, I had to sort of go out of my blinkered world of parenting and really look at, the workplace as a whole. And so Parents Matter, the name Parents Matters became slightly redundant. And so we changed it to Employees Matter, and that is exactly what we now are, another 10 years on. And so we work with all sorts of companies in sort of the area, I suppose, of employee engagement. And that might be engaging employees in their health and well-being. It absolutely still continues to be engaging the working parents. But mental well-being has become a huge thing that we've been working on with clients for the last 5 years. And that led us to set up a separate event, This Can Happen Workplace Mental Health Conference.
Amazing. So there's lots to unpack, and I really want to talk about the event, because I know obviously, was it the first event last year?
Last year, yes.
And Prince William came, and it was obviously a successful event, and the next event is not far away.
Yes, November the 25th this year.
Okay, so talking about sort of your experience in the workplace then. So obviously you said back then flexible working didn't really exist.
Yeah.
What's the biggest kind of change you've seen from when you first started to almost now, where companies are starting to proactively engage with, mental health?
Yeah, I think mental health has got to be the biggest change that we have seen. After, I'd say, flexible working, I think, it's not difficult to find people that agile work 4 days a week now, 3 days a week even, 2 days at home, that's really quite popular now, and I think made a real difference in the workplace. But mental well-being was really not talked about at all in many companies, and to be honest, is still not spoken about enough. And there are plenty of companies that don't even look at it yet at all. But strides have been made, and just by the fact that over 150 companies came to our conference last year and were sitting in sessions on all ranges of mental health just shows that the conversation has started. Albeit if only some companies are very much at the beginning, you're always going to get the spectrum of companies, some that are doing a small amount. Always there are those leaders in the field, and that's great, and we can all aspire to that. But I think mental well-being has been the biggest change in the workplace.
And why do you think it has taken that time? Do you think it's just the lack of education around it?
I think, especially here, it's a lot of sort of the British stiff upper lip. We don't talk very, you sit on a crowded train, nobody talks to each other. We don't talk to each other in the workplace. And obviously, the huge stigma of mental health. And I think people haven't been educated enough in mental health. So their vision of mental health is, men in white coats coming to get you, and that you can't have a normal conversation with somebody who has... It's all been negative, hasn't it? It's been about you've got mental health issues, and if you've got mental health issues, there's something wrong with you. But the dialogue now is changing so that we all have mental health, and that's the way the conversations need to progress. But that really hasn't happened up until very recently.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's starting to happen in terms of the awareness. Some companies are taking it on board more than others.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, the really key point is just the stigma still associated with it. Sometimes I ask people, what's the first word that comes to mind when you say the word mental?
Yeah.
And it's crazy,
Absolutely.
all of these kind of negative associations. So when you're talking about mental health, it's still very sort of negative.
Yeah.
So with the work that you're doing, what do you think some companies can do if they haven't started? Like, what would be the first step?
I think the first step is you have to have buy-in from your company. A lot of people talk about that the most important thing is to get senior leaders talking. And once senior leaders start talking, you get the buy-in from everyone else, and it's okay to talk about. I do agree with that to a certain extent, but I also think that a lot of everyday people in an organisation who haven't reached senior level, sometimes that's not enough for them, because they quite understandably can think, well, I'm not at that senior level, I've got the rest of my career ahead of me, and if I say what those senior leaders have said, I've got an awful lot more to lose. The senior leaders aren't necessarily going to lose their jobs. They're at the top of their game now, and they have the confidence to be able to say what they want. But I think sometimes it's not so easy for people who've just started their career, or even middle management, to have the confidence to say what a senior leader would say. So I think that the senior leadership buy-in is hugely important, but I do believe it's a combined effort from within, and that even if you are just at the beginning of your career and that you feel very strongly about that, speaking up at that early age and creating something within the organisation is hugely powerful, perhaps even more powerful than a senior leader. I don't, not everybody might agree with me with that, but I do feel there's something about it being the responsibility of everyone in the organisation to talk about it. It's not just an HR issue, it's not just senior leadership, it's everybody taking care of each other.
Yeah, I agree. And I think if you're almost waiting for senior management, you almost feel powerless.
Yeah.
You feel like you can't make the change. If you make it about everyone can start to make the change and sort of normalise the conversation as a whole.
Yeah.
You're not waiting for HR, you're not waiting for senior management to start. And a lot of the so you obviously do a lot of workshops, speakers, and I know you're doing sort of webinars as well, which, I was very grateful to be on, and I was just astounded by the numbers.
Yes, so you talk about the webinar. So we did a webinar, didn't we, to celebrate World Suicide Prevention Day last month, and we got a panel together of people that had experienced it in some way, shape or form. And I would say that a couple of years ago, if I'd gone out to my clients and companies to say, you know, would you like to educate your staff and for your staff to have this available to them, I'm not sure how many would. But we had hundreds of people on that webinar.
I mean, I was just surprised because of the topic.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think what was, you know, you would expect that a lot of people maybe who can identify with some of the speakers and have been through experience in family members, friends or themselves would sign up and want to listen and hear. But I think what was also really interesting is that it's not just those people. It is people that want to understand more, haven't had experience of it personally, but that's the culture that's changing, that I think even if people don't necessarily identify with it, they're keen to understand and learn, and that's where the change is slowly happening.
Yeah, and do you believe that with the webinars it creates a bit of, it's almost anonymous in a way?
Yeah.
So that almost gets more people engaging too?
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons, and, you know, I wouldn't want to say that we put on webinars purely for anonymity, because again it's kind of defeats the purpose. You want people to be talking openly about mental health. However, again, I just think it's more important than not doing it at all. And, you know, for this extremely sensitive subject, I totally understand, you know, if suicide in any way, shape or form is not necessarily something people want to talk about. But I think one of the themes that really did come up from the webinar was how people who had experienced it, once they started talking about it, it was so much of an easier process for them to grieve and understand what had happened. A couple of speakers said they never spoke to anybody, they thought it was all their fault, but once they sort of decided to speak, things really changed for them.
Yeah, and I think that's key, even though, as you say, the webinar's more anonymous in a way. It's if someone can relate to the story, then they may go back to the workplace and start having that conversation. So where did the idea for the event come from?
So it started off with colleagues that I was working with, Johnny Benjamin and Neil Laybourne, and I'm sure many people are very familiar with their story, but essentially Johnny Benjamin attempted to take his life off Waterloo Bridge, and Neil, a stranger, came out of Waterloo Station and essentially saved his life. Obviously I'm telling this story very briefly and succinctly, but just to give a bit of context, that they went on to really raise the profile and the conversation about male mental health in a lot of workplaces. And we were talking about this, and we kind of found that there were a couple of really interesting things that were coming out of the conversations that they were having in the workplaces. One, that they kind of had this benefit of going into all these companies and getting real insights into what companies were doing when it came to mental health. And they saw everything that these companies were doing, but there was no conversation between any of these companies. So they might go into an insurance company one day and a law firm the next day and a construction company another time. And lots of these companies are doing really great stuff, but none of them were sharing, and they could so easily learn from each other and be able to implement things that they learn from other people. So that was the first thing, that there was kind of their no sharing platform. And then the other thing is that, you know, Johnny and Neil would go into a talk, and then the company would sort of say, gosh, this is great, but what do we do next? And so there was kind of this gap that we felt should be addressed. Very much looking at, where is this forum where, you know, there's lots of wellbeing platforms and wellbeing conferences and HR conferences, and they're all obviously excellent, but a conference that was totally dedicated to mental health, to solutions, to company solutions, where companies would sit on that stage and talk about an area that they have been looking at, the challenges as well as the successes, and so that the delegates sitting in the audience could think, gosh, do you know what? I could absolutely adapt that to my organisation. I've been, this is a real tricky thing for me. Take just as a prime example, how do you internally market mental health in an organisation? Internal comms are key. How they do marketing, what logos they use, what colours they use, all that sort of thing. So it's those sorts of things where we get panellists up on the stage from different companies talking about their marketing strategies when it comes to mental health. That's the idea of the conference, to bring everyone together, to network with like-minded people who you can really ask for advice for.
Was there a specific sort of, strategy that some companies are using that's been very beneficial?
Yeah, so we've really tracked and we've really tried to keep in touch with companies that came last year, for example, and are either coming back this year or have been able to tell us about the journey they've had in the last year, which is great. And many of those people are going to be on the platform this year who were maybe in the audience last year but are on the stage this year and are talking to us, about how they've started their journey in the last year, or, how they've moved on from last year. Another addition that we had this year, which was an idea that we wanted to carry out to showcase all the great work that is going on as well, is we launched This Can Happen Mental Health Workplace Awards this year. And we have been overwhelmed with the entries. And I think what the entries have done, what the awards have done, which is really interesting, is a lot of people have volunteers in this area. And it's not part of their everyday job to carry kind of the mental health flag within a company. And I think it's been a real opportunity for companies to be able to celebrate and thank the volunteers. So that's been one area that we've really seen come out of the awards, as well as the most amazing entries of people, of companies we didn't know that they were doing anything. And I think everything's with the judges at the moment. There's online judging going on at the moment, but I think that has been really interesting and shows that companies now want to be recognised for the work that they're doing in mental health. That would never have happened before.
It's true, and I think it's just, if not a black and white sort of strategy, but if it was easier for companies to understand what to do first, what to do next, more companies would probably start focusing on it. But I'm guessing there's so many unanswered questions around it at the moment that it makes it difficult.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're doing a lot of amazing stuff. I know you're doing a sort of panel on the 4-day work week, I believe. The future workplace. And we spoke about sort of flexible working. There was an article, I think, about sort of Labour trying to introduce a 4-day work week. Where do you kind of stand with that? Because I know you're sort of a busy person with different responsibilities. Do you think that's a good thing, or...?
I do think it's a good thing, and I definitely welcome it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from the people that are talking about that. I mean, obviously I've spoken to them already, and they're tracking, the results of it. And from what I understand, there's definitely no detrimental results at all. However, I think the whole thing about mental health strategies is that there isn't one that fits every company, and I think that's really important. And I think the multinational companies that have thousands and thousands of people will find it very difficult to implement a 4-day working week. But they are big enough to put in more flexibility where their employees would like it, rather than the smaller companies who maybe find the flexibility slightly more challenging. So I think, whilst I think the idea, and I really welcome the 4-day week or staggered working or whatever it might be that they put in, and I think that can only be positive for mental well-being, I wouldn't like people to think that that's the only solution, because it's not. It can't be applicable to every company. But I think we're going to see more companies going that route. Definitely.
And I think, like you say, it's definitely that tailored approach, because I'm guessing industry specific is so different as well. I think you've got more digital agencies that are kind of, you know, a little bit more loose with flexible working, whereas the construction industry, you know, it's different per industry as well.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, there are absolutely some jobs that have to be done in the office or have to be done on a certain site. You can't suddenly just get up and leave, you know, at midday. You know, we have to be sensible about it. But just because the 4-day working week, as an example, doesn't work for them, there are other things that can make the workplace more mentally healthy, and that's what we're trying to advocate, trying to hear what companies are doing. But yes, there's lots of options out there, and I think the difficulty actually is for companies to cherry pick which ones are right for them. And I'm hoping that you know, the conference can provide a platform to become more aware of those options.
Yeah, I suppose attending the conference, you're going to get ideas and see if that can apply into your line of work.
Yeah.
Then personally for you, how do you kind of, obviously we've got to know each other, how do you kind of manage it all? Like, you know, personally, you've got so much, you know, it's inspirational how much you have going on.
I have a very, very supportive family, and I'm very lucky. My kids are slightly older now, so need you in slightly different ways. But I think they really appreciate a working mum, and, you know, enjoy hearing about the work that I do. Yes, from time to time, things get out of kilter. They absolutely do. But I think the important thing, and, you know, this is for everybody, is that as long as it's not out of kilter most of the time, and you can say, things are a bit up and down just some of the time, then you're doing all right. We all can't expect it to be plain sailing all the time. We have our bouts of total manicness and, you know, working at night, working first thing in the morning. But as long as that's only a small amount, it's manageable, and sometimes you just have to reach deadlines, and that's life. But I think what working in this space has taught me that you have to recognise when enough is enough, and when actually you're not working in a positive way at all. It's about acquiring those tools to recognise it in yourself, which I think is probably one of the most important tools. And so I'd like to think that I know when it's too much, and we stop and we regroup. And I have to say that actually, even though when you're in that mode you think stopping is the worst possible thing that you can do, stopping is actually the best thing you can do. And coming back to it another time makes you far more efficient.
I can relate to that, 100%. So just to kind of wrap up, firstly, in terms of the benefits of companies that you've worked with or people that come to the conference, there's obviously, you know, productivity. You know, what other sort of benefits are you seeing these companies having in terms of them looking after the mental health of their staff?
I think that retention of staff is a key area. In this space, a lot of companies focus on line manager training, which I think is really helpful, and it is key. People don't tend to leave a company just because of the company. They leave a company potentially because of their manager. And so informing and working closely with line managers goes a long way to retention. Having a mentally healthy workforce definitely correlates to higher retention rates, that is for sure. And I just think to work in an office where people are looking out for each other, can communicate with each other, where a colleague can turn around to a colleague and say, I have to tell you, I had the most terrible night last night, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, can only be a more positive thing for a workplace. 100%.
And I think as well, sometimes I forget this, and I think, you know, you probably forget it with the amount of work you're doing, but it's also, you know, you're changing lives, and it's amazing to kind of, you know, potentially see that if a company is proactively looking after their staff, it's life-saving, especially with the statistics around, you know, suicide in itself. So I just want to say thank you, and you are an inspiration, and I'm a little bit nervous on this podcast. But just finally, where can people find out about you or about Employees Matter or the event?
Thank you. Okay, so Employees Matter is at employeesmatter.co.uk, and this can happen, and all the information about the 25th of November is at tchevents.com.
Yeah, and I'll link up to all of that as well. But thank you again, Zoe, and thank you for listening to the podcast. Please let us know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you all in the next episode.